Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. The first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Rashida Tlaib and Israel. The media in both the United States and in Israel have been saturated with the saga of Democratic United States Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan and her visit to Israel, her non-visit to Israel, her maybe we are not quite sure what is happening visit to Israel. Everyone knows the story and everyone has an opinion. There was probably not a single Sabbath table in either Israel or diaspora that has not analyzed, discussed, dissected this issue. For some, the questions went something like this. Was Israel correct to deny her entry? Would it have been better to permit her entry from the outset? Was visiting her grandmother a valid humanitarian reason to grant an exception to the pro-BDS U.S. Congresswoman's entry to Israel? Should any and all U.S. senators and representatives be automatically permitted to entry, regardless of their stance on Israel? For others, the conversation took a different track. Did Israel fall into a trap that Tlaib and her handlers set from the very beginning for them? Was it wise to deny her? Was it right to deny her? Should being wise be more important than being right? And then the big question, did she plan all along to say, no way, I'm not going? These questions, while they may be important, are now beside the point. And there is nothing that hasn't been already said. But what has not been discussed is still very important and very relevant, especially for the future. The question we need to ask is, what factors and variables should the democratic state of Israel, the only Jewish state in the world, utilize in making this kind of decision? The only answer is, Israel must make decisions that are best for Israel, that are best for Israel's defense, and Israel must act justly. These two issues, defense and justice, are often symbiotic. And then there are certain givens. Israel must not be swayed by the reactions of world leaders, including those of the President of the United States. Israel will anger, disappoint, and or irk the world regardless of what she does. Israel can try to do what the world says it wants her to do, but even that will not change the way she's perceived by those who hate her. The bottom line is this. Israel has only one option, and that is to do the right thing regardless of the inevitable blowback. If Rashida Tlaib, Donald Trump's story, has taught us anything, it is that Israel must advance the principle that support for Israel must be a bipartisan, wall-to-wall consensus in the United States Senate and in the House of Representatives. If Israel decided to ban Tlaib and her colleague, Representative Ilhan Omar, from Minneapolis, so be it. If Israeli leadership wanted to make an example of the two members of the U.S. Congress and believed that the message was worth the backlash from friends and foes, then that decision was a good decision. However, if Israel made the decision because U.S. President Donald Trump asked them to, or because he tweeted that permitting them entry would show weakness, then it was a poor decision and the wrong one. Israelis know that their actions are always under a microscope, more so than any other country in the world. So when they have time to make a decision, and there was plenty of time to contemplate this decision, it should be made with a clear understanding of the diplomatic costs. And before announcing its decision to the world, Israel should prepare and then immediately put into play proactive responses crafted to obviate the political fallout. All responses to the many, even the implausible, far-fetched reactions and fallout. Waffling on a decision is one of the worst things Israel can do. It sends the wrong message. It clouds the correctness of the decision. It suggests that the foundation for the decision was shaky and that it was not based on conviction and proper values. That, unfortunately, is what happened. Making the right decision, even when it is politically unwise, is still the right decision. One should try to explain that right decision, but Israel should never apologize for it. What people do not understand is that there are serious limits to the freedom of speech in democratic societies. Freedom of speech is not a free-for-all, where anyone can say anything they want. There are restrictions. A call to action, let's say, that is a cause that will cause damage to the state or to harm anyone is an exception to the freedom of speech. The boycott, divestments, and sanctions, the BDS movement, is an example of that type of action. The raison d'etre of BDS is to hurt Israel. As such, in Israel, BDS supporters are not protected by freedom of speech when they speak about BDS. Israel does not and cannot lend a platform to those who actively organize actions that will damage her. That is why in 2017, Israel passed a law allowing the state to actively prevent BDS supporters from coming to Israel and using Israel, the country, as a platform to attack it. One of the most important responsibilities of a state is to protect itself. It is a slam dunk exception to freedom of speech. Israel must protect itself. Sometimes one has to wonder, why does the United States even care about peace in the Middle East? I've pondered this question over and over in recent years. The phenomenon dubbed the deal of the century just adds to my curiosity. The question is worthy of analysis. But to do that, everyone needs to be on the same page about one indisputable fact. Everyone must clearly understand that the United States has displayed interest in the Middle East a long time before this, a very, really long time. What has been happening over the past several years, several presidential administrations, is not a modern phenomenon. Starting back in the days of the Barbary Wars, the war that started in 1801 when the United States was a mere 25 years old and continued into the Second Barbary War, which began in 1815. The U.S. was involved in the Middle East. It was the first overseas war in which the United States was engaged in. The U.S. merchant ships were being kidnapped by Barbary pirates. Pirates from Algiers, Morocco, Tunis, Tripoli, known as the Barbary States. The pirates would only release the ships after their ransom demands were met. Presidents Thomas Jefferson and James Madison refused to pay and went to war to protect the U.S. mercantile maritime interest in the Middle East. One of the first major tasks of the United States Marine Corps was to keep those ships safe. The mantra at the time was, millions for security, not 1 cent for ransom. Interestingly, there were Jewish pirates too. One named Sinan Rees was dubbed the Great Jew. He flew what his compatriots called the Flag of Solomon and what today is called the Star of David. This Barbary corsair, a pirate, is buried in the Jewish cemetery in Albania. The U.S. has been involved in the interests in the region long before 1948 and the creation of the State of Israel. Following the Holocaust and the birth of the Democratic Jewish State of Israel in the ancestral home of the Jews, the U.S. proceeded to play a special role in the region, not just an interested role in the Middle East. This role continues today. Part of the decision to be so involved in the Middle East in modern times was part of a moral and part of a strategic goal. The moral role is obvious, although less central than simply the decision to support a valued democratic ally in the Middle East. The strategic element centered on the fight the United States was having with the Red Menace, the Soviet Union. The U.S. was fighting the Soviet encroachment, and Israel was a bloc against that encroachment. Israel was the United States' sole bulwark against the Soviet Union in the region. Another reason is oil. For some, protecting U.S. oil interests was reason enough to throw Israel under the bus. Regardless, the U.S. was engaged in the region. A myth believed by many was that the problems in the Middle East all stemmed from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. According to that myth, resolving that conflict would resolve the problems of the region. Of course, that was not true then, and it is not true now. But it did drive many American leaders on both sides of the proverbial political aisle to try to resolve the issue. For some U.S. presidents, the Middle East issue and the quest for peace in the Middle East became their whale, much as with Ahab in Herman Melville's novel Moby Dick. For others, it turned into their windmill, as is Cervantes' Don Quixote. When you think that the leader who visited the Clinton White House more than any other leader in the world, not just any other Middle Eastern leader, was Yasser Arafat, it tells you a lot. American presidents want to leave an imprint, a strong footprint in history, not just a simple footnote in history, and they are consumed by legacy historians will assign to them, bringing peace to the Middle East, solving the intractable problem that has confused and derailed and frustrated so many of their predecessors, would ensure them a strong place in the annals of world history. But idealism, self-motivation aside, sometimes problems are not really ready to be solved. And sometimes the involved parties do not want their problems solved. The U.S. loves an underdog, and after all, that's how the United States began. That love is a double-edged sword, and Israel has felt the impact of both sides of it. During Israel's fledgling years, the United States supporting the image of the tiny Israel struggling against the sea of enemies. But Israel not only survived, Israel thrives. And now the imagery is the reverse. Palestinians have taken the underdog position in many Americans' eyes. Donald Trump has his eye on history, his mind on oil economics, and his heart in Israel. Much has changed since the days of the Barbary pirates, but I have a feeling that the issues that motivated Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe continue to motivate today's President of the United States. And I hope that the future U.S. presidents will continue to feel and behave the same way. Peace in the Middle East is still an ideal and far from reality. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. I want to look at the New York Times and what they're saying about Rashida Tlaib's trip to Israel and Israel's response. Let's look at a column by Tom Friedman and then an editorial by the editorial board. First up is a column by Thomas Friedman, arguably the most influential columnist in the English language. His bread and butter is the Middle East, and specifically Israel, after having been the New York Times bureau chief there. He was also in Lebanon for many years. This particular column was published online on August 15th and in print on August 16th. And then for the next 2 weeks, across the board, all over America, by many publications that subscribe to the New York Times service. It got a lot of play. To prove my point, I took this particular version of the column from Eugene, Oregon, their Register Guard, which was published online August 21st. Friedman's piece is entitled, "Trump is Not Helping Israel." His agenda is to let Israel and American Jews know that they are being deceived. They are not being dealt with truthfully. I should note that Israel's Hebrew press also covered the column, but not as a column, but rather as a news item, and quoted extensively from it in the Hebrew press. This is how Friedman begins. He isn't pulling punches. I'm going to say this as simply and as clearly as I can. If you're an American Jew and you're planning on voting for Donald Trump because you think he is pro-Israel, you're a damn fool. Oh, don't get me wrong. Trump has said and done many things that are in the interest of the current Israeli government and have been widely appreciated by the Israeli public. To deny that would be to deny the obvious. But here's what's also obvious. Trump's way of and motivation for expressing his affection for Israel is guided by his political desire to improve his re-election chances by depicting the entire Republican Party as pro-Israel and the entire Democratic Party as anti-Israel. As a result, Trump, with the knowing help of Israel's current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is doing something no American president and Israeli Prime Minister have done before. They are making support for Israel a wedge issue in American politics. Now Friedman explains his real thesis and shows where the danger is. It is Israel getting involved in U.S. party politics. He continues, few things are more dangerous to Israel's long-term interests than its becoming a partisan matter in America, which is Israel's vital political, military, and economic backer in the world. As Dori Gold, the right-wing former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations and once a very close advisor to Netanyahu, warned in the dialogue at the Hudson Institute on November 27, 2018, you reach out to Democrats and you reach out to Republicans and you don't get caught playing partisan politics in the United States. Trump's campaign to tar the entire Democratic Party with some of the hostile views towards Israel of a few of its newly elected congresswomen and Netanyahu's careless willingness to concede to Trump's demand and bar two of them, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, from visiting Israel and the West Bank is part of a process that will do huge long-term damage to Israel's interest and support in America. Friedman offers examples and a powerful argument against getting involved in U.S. party politics. He continues, but who can blame them? Trump is equating the entire Democratic Party with hatred for Israel, while equating support for Netanyahu, who leads the most extreme far-right government that Israel has ever had, who is facing indictment on 3 counts of corruption, and whose top priority is getting reelected so that he can have the Israeli Knesset overrule its justice system and keep him out of court with loving Israel. How many young Americans want to buy into that narrative? If Bibi wins, he plans to pass a law banning his own indictment on corruption. And then, when Israel's Supreme Court strikes down that law as illegal, he plans to get the Knesset to pass another law, making the Supreme Court subservient to his parliament. I'm not making this up. Israel will become a Jewish banana republic. Now, Friedman's conclusion, a description of Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and Trump. He writes, "Don't get me wrong. I strongly oppose the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which Representatives Omar and Tlaib have embraced, because it wants to erase the possibility of a 2-state solution, and I am particularly unhappy with Representative Omar. I know a lot about her home district in Minnesota, because I grew up in it, in St. Louis Park. Omar represents the biggest concentration of Jews and Muslims living together in one district in the upper Midwest. She was perfectly placed to be a bridge builder between Muslims and Jews. Instead, sadly, she has been a bridge destroyer between the two since she came to Washington. But any time she's legitimately criticized, Democrats automatically scream Islamophobia and defend her, and that's as disturbing as Trump. I know that more than a few Somali immigrants in Minneapolis who face so many challenges from gang violence to unemployment are asking, why is Omar spending time on the West Bank of the Jordan and not on the West Bank of the Mississippi? I love Israelis, Palestinians, and Arabs, but God saved me from some of their American friends. So many of them just want to exploit this problem to advance themselves politically, get attention, raise money, or delegitimize their opponents. In that, Trump is not alone. He's just the worst of the worst." Second up is an editorial from the New York Times. The editorial is entitled, "What Are Trump and Netanyahu Afraid Of?" Subheadlined, "Barring Representatives Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib shows weakness and intolerance, not strength," by the editorial board. As usual, the online version adds this caveat, and here's a quote from the caveat. "The editorial board represents the opinions of the board, its editor, and the publisher. It is separate from the newsroom and the op-ed section." It's dated August 15th, 2019. Here is how they begin. "It's difficult to stomach the notion that an American president would put pressure on Israel to deny entry to 2 members of the United States Congress. There are not many traditions of decorum that President Trump has not trampled on since entering the White House. But to put at risk, so cynically, America's special relationship with Israel solely to titillate the bigots in his base, to lean so crassly on the foreign leader, to punish his own political adversaries, to demonstrate so foul a lack of respect for the most elemental democratic principles is new territory even for him." The editorial board continues, "Though many American presidents have sought to influence Israeli decisions throughout the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, they usually did so diplomatically. And to advance America's interests, Mr. Trump, by contrast, leaned on Mr. Netanyahu as he would on one of his own appointees, in broad view and in direct violation of what the President of the United States should be doing when democratically elected lawmakers are threatened with a blockade by an allied leader. There can be and has been considerable debate over what the 2 congresswomen, the first 2 Muslim women elected to Congress, and both sharp critics of the Israeli government, have said and done. They have supported the controversial boycott, divestment, and sanctions BDS movement aimed at pressuring Israel into ending its occupation of the West Bank, a movement that some Jews have deemed to be anti-Semitic. And now they conclude, "Yet contrary to Mr. Trump's tweet, it is blocking entry by 2 American legislators who are critics of Israel that shows great weakness, especially after Israel has hosted visits by delegations of 31 Republican and 41 Democratic lawmakers this month. It has long been Israel's mantra that critics of its policies should come to see for themselves, and the country is certainly strong enough to handle any criticism from 2 members of Congress. Mr. Trump has done Israel no favor." Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you a collection of 5 cartoons from the same artist this week. Her name is Anastasia Steinberg, and she calls herself and her work Zionist Pugs. The pug is a type of dog. The dog is featured in many of her cartoons as the voice of reason. You'll see that in a few seconds. She can be found at www.zionistpugs.com. Steinberg describes her work online in this way. Zionist Pugs creator Anastasia Steinberg draws comics highlighting the absurdity of the Israel haters and their double standards. And oi, she's got lots of material to work with these days. When she's not feeling snarky, you can find her gardening, sewing, or sleeping. All these cartoons predate the conflict between Israel, Tlaib, and Omar, but still they address their anti-Israel and anti-Semitic stances. The first cartoon is from March 4th and is called Tribulations of Ilhan Omar. The cartoon has the Zionist Pugs speaking to Ilhan Omar and saying, "It's shocking people question your integrity because of your religion. So stop doing that to us." The second cartoon is dated March 18th and is called Hamas versus the Protesters. Because you know this is going to happen. That's what the title is. Two people are speaking to one another. One asks, peaceful Palestinian demonstrators in Gaza are being attacked by Hamas. What should we do? The second answers, blame Israel. Third up is from April 9th and is entitled Us, When Fiction Resembles Reality. A girl in Pugs just exited a movie called Us. The girl says to Pugs, the movie was terrifying. Evil monsters came through underground tunnels to murder people. Pugs then gets up on the ladder and changes the name of the movie from Us to Hamas. Fourth up is from May 5th, 2019, and is called All Israel's Fault. A young man is speaking to a Palestinian terrorist saying, "Oh yeah, I totally get it. If Israel did not exist, you wouldn't have to try to destroy it, murdering your own people in the process. So it's all Israel's fault." And finally, number 5 is dated June 2nd, 2019, and is called Calming Feeling. Rashida Tlaib gets the cartoon treatment. This cartoon depicts Tlaib's family/grandmother welcoming Jews to Palestine and shows the Haj Amin, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, holding the Nazi flag, and Tlaib thinking about her family that helped Jews. The caption reads, "That calming feeling when you disregard reality." In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. A Palestinian tech company named Daroob created an app that can be downloaded through Google that will avoid Israeli checkpoints and the long lines and the waits that are involved in the checkpoints. The root Daraba is found 58 times in the Quran. It's mentioned in the Yadriba and as a noun, Daroob, it means to set forth. Daroob navigation uses crowdsourcing, so people use their phones and the GPS to show where traffic is building up and offer updates and preferred routes. Daroob operates much like Waze or Google Maps, but those systems were not very effective in the Palestinian areas, and this one is. The company made their own maps and their own program. Many checkpoints are permanent, others change all the time. The IDF does that for security reasons. Although not its primary purpose, the program helps terrorists avoid the checkpoints. The IDF will work hard to stay out in front of this new software. Here's a surprise. ISIS is reestablishing itself in Syria. Don't just take my word for it. A report released by the United States Department of Defense Inspector General's office spells it out very clearly. This is what they say. Despite losing its territorial caliphate, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, ISIS, solidified its insurgent capabilities in Iraq and was resurging in Syria from April through June. The report begins with the Principal Deputy Inspector General Glenn A. Fine writing that from April through June, U.S. forces in Syria fulfilled the Trump administration's directive to partly withdraw from the country. Military officials told the Inspector General's office that, quote, the reduction of U.S. forces has decreased the support available for Syrian partner forces at a time when their forces need more training and equipping to respond to the ISIS resurgence. Officials told the Inspector General's office that ISIS continues to function as an insurgency in both Iraq and Syria, partly because forces there remain unable to sustain long-term operations against ISIS militants. ISIS is also, quote, likely reestablishing financial networks in both countries, unquote. Beyond that, military officials warned ISIS maintains an extensive worldwide social media effort to recruit fighters. This means that ISIS is bouncing back. It also means that ISIS is waging war against the U.S., allies, and others who targeted them. Are you surprised? Iran is masterful at propping themselves up as undefeatable. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Naval Commander, Rear Admiral Ali Fadavi, spoke to Fars, the official Iranian news agency, and said, quote, Americans have always been the ultimate and full-scale losers in their encounter with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Navy. And the most notable cases of their defeats were April 14, 1988, January 12, 2016, before their drone was shot down on June 20th. Fadavi was referring to three incidents. The April 1988 incident, when an Iranian mine badly damaged the U.S. frigate, the Samuel B. Roberts. The second incident was Iran's kidnapping in January 2016 of 2 American ravine boats and 10 sailors after the boats mistakenly strayed into Iranian waters. And the third, of course, was the downing in this June of the U.S. Triton drone. Fadavi continues to say, and I'm quoting here again, that all failures and defeats of the United States forces in the Persian Gulf are illustrative of Americans' desperation, frustration, and agony in the face of Iranian nation in the past 40 years. This is simply, and not surprisingly, not what happened at all. In 1988, the U.S. responded, launching operations Praying Mantis and crippling Iran's navy. Luckily, the situation de-escalated and didn't turn into a full-blown war. As for Fadavi's other 2 examples, the United States wisely chose to neither react nor overreact. It's all about spin. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that there is no word in Hebrew for propaganda? We use the word hasbara. That word actually means to explain. We speak a lot about propaganda, but the Hebrew word says it best. It should all be about simply explaining. Israel is a wondrous, miraculous place, albeit with flaws. We all have flaws. However, the world is a much better place because Israel exists. The job of every lover of Israel is to simply explain what Israel is all about. We are all Hasbara torch carriers. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.